Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my quarter 3 wrap up. So all of the books that I read in July, August, and September. Overall, I feel like I had some good reads. I feel like I don't think I had anything that was terrible. I had kind of like neutral to good, which is great. And I was consistently reading, maybe not reading large volumes, but still like consistently reading throughout the months, which is great since I have been like kind of in and out of reading slumps. So quarter 3, doing pretty good by my standards. Starting out in July, the first book that I finished was Radiance by Grace Draven. This was a reread, I have no idea why I was compelled to reread this book, because the fact is I didn't really like it the first time I read it. This is a fantasy romance that is fairly like wholesome and low spice, I guess, in compared to what a lot of fantasy romance is now. But I feel like it has kind of like a cult following on BookTube. There are some people who like really love it. And so I had picked it up a couple of years ago. Wasn't a huge fan of it. Like, I thought it was just okay. And then for some reason, I just recently felt compelled to reread it, and I am glad that I did, because I actually enjoyed it a lot more on reread. So a little bit about what this book is about. In it, our two main characters are essentially about to enter into a like arranged political marriage. They're from two different like races of people. So one of them is a human, the woman is a human, and then the guy is from this kind of magical race of people called the Kai, who look very different. Like, they're still humanoid, but they have like gray skin, yellow eyes, they have like long claws and fangs, and they just have like a very different look to them. The two of them are kind of going into this marriage not expecting a lot, because it is just a political marriage. But when they meet, they find out that they really hit it off. Maybe not romantically, but as friends. They are like really honest with each other. They have similar humor. They're able to kind of approach this weird situation with a lot of humor and honesty between them. And they're really both very open to learning more about each other and each other's cultures, and really building at least a friendship between them. They do develop romantic feelings for each other, and I think I liked this more, like knowing what to expect from it. Fantasy romance isn't really my genre. I tend to like things that are more like, it's fantasy that has a little romance side plot, but it's not a main plot. Or if I'm gonna read genre romance, I usually go for like contemporary romance, where it's like that is the only thing going on. Fantasy romance tends to just not have the right balance of things for me. But rereading this, knowing what to expect from it, I actually really enjoyed it a lot more this time around. I liked seeing them, you know, building this relationship between the two of them that is really built on like respect and honesty with each other, and the humor that they can find in this like bizarre situation that they have ended up with, and appreciating their differences and coming to understand each other better. I will say, I still do not care about the actual plot, like the magical political plot line at all. In this first book, it is not very prominent, but there are like undercurrents of some like political machinations happening, and some people who are like against their union and all of this because of the political ramifications. There's also some weird magical stuff going on, and I think that if this was like more purely a fantasy that focused on that, maybe I would be interested in it. But in this context, I was just like, I don't care about any of this plot. I'm only here for the romance. So I'm not quite sure if I'm going to continue on with the series. I think there are 2 more books in the series. My understanding is that the second book follows these same 2 characters, but I'm kind of assuming that it will be a little bit more political and plot focused, because we've kind of already gone through the, you know, them like falling for each other, developing their relationship stage. Of course, their relationship will probably still be like central to the plot, but As much as I did enjoy this on my reread, I don't think that I care enough about these individual characters to continue on with them past the point of them like getting together. The third book, my understanding is that it actually follows a different couple who we were introduced to in the first one. And so that one I was kind of maybe interested in, because I was like, well, that would kind of come back around to that like initial like falling for each other phase of the romance. I don't know. If you've read this series, I would love to know. If you think that reading on in the series is worth it, like, do I have to read the second book? A little bit, you know, non-spoiler, but kind of like, what is it like? What does it focus on? Would it be possible for me to skip the second book and just read the third one? Or maybe I should just be happy with the first book, you know? I enjoyed it, I got what I needed out of it. Maybe I don't need to keep going. Let me know your thoughts on that if you've read any more of the books in this series. But yeah, so reread for Radiance, I gave it 4 stars. After that, I finished Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. This is the first book in the Seven Water series. And I have a very long spoiler reading vlog and a much shorter spoiler-free review for this. So I'll link those in the description if you want to know either my spoiler or non-spoiler thoughts on this in more detail. But I loved rereading this. It's actually been maybe like 6 years or so since I last reread this. I used to reread this a lot more frequently, but since starting BookTube and the world of books, you know, expanding for me, I have been rereading this less frequently, so it was interesting to revisit this, especially at this point, because I think the last time I reread this, I had maybe like just started BookTube, and since being on BookTube for like 7-ish years or so, you know, the way that I read books, how conscious I am of like the structure and prose and plotting and authorial intent and like, you know, how things are, how books are like constructed, and then also my own taste, what I do and do not like in them. I've just become much more aware and able to like pinpoint and articulate things. So it was very interesting to read this, which is, you know, an old beloved book of mine, an old favorite, to read it through this like lens of like how I read books now, because it's just very different from how I used to read them. Anyways, I really enjoyed rereading this. It was great to be back in this world. There was so much about this that I had forgotten. Like, I remembered the like large plot beats, but there were so many details that I had forgotten about this. And I think I said in my review that I'm like, my subjective personal rating of this is 5 stars. I love this book, love this series. It is both, I think this is very much, you know, my taste in books, but it also has a lot of nostalgia mixed into it. If I am reading it more critically and giving a more objective review, I think that it maybe is in the 4-star range, especially with some of the pacing of it being, it has a few pacing issues, and there are other details maybe that would make me bring it down to a 4-star for a more objective rating, but my personal rating is 5 stars. It's fantastic. Next up, I was in the mood for like lady night fantasy, so I read The Fireborn Blade by Charlotte Bond. This is a recent release. I think this came out earlier this year. And it's a little fantasy novella where we are following this lady knight who is a dragon hunter, but things are not exactly as they appear. This quest that she has been sent on may have some more nefarious elements to it. This is also often pitched as being like sapphic fantasy, and of course having dragons in it. So overall, I was not a fan of this. It's been a while now since I read this, and this was not one that stuck in my brain, but I will say I remember that for the most part, I found this really boring. It took me a really long time to actually finish this book, even though it's incredibly short. And that was because it was so boring. It has a few different like plot, like timelines that it's following. We get kind of our main timeline with our main character hunting this dragon. We get flashbacks, and then we also have these sections that are from this book about like the history of dragon hunting, and it is giving excerpts of these examples of like other knights that have killed dragons and the lore around them, like how they did it, what happened, the ramifications, all of that. I think that those sections, it was an interesting way to do that because it provided a lot of world building, gave a lot of context to like dragons in this world, their magic, their role, how dangerous this situation is based on like the many different and horrific ways people have died, all of this. But they weren't interesting. They were very dry. I found the main character to be really boring. Like everything about this, there were like a few flashes here and there that were maybe interesting, but overall I just found this really boring. I kind of felt like I was dragging myself through it, even though it's like maybe 150 pages. Also, I will say that although it is marketed as like sapphic fantasy, there isn't really much of a sapphic romance in this. Now, I will say, since having read this, I found out that there is a sequel, so maybe that romance will be more developed and built up in the next book. I don't know if there's going to be a series or if it's just the one other book. In this first one, I was reading this assuming it's a standalone. There was very little of the like sapphic romance in this. Like I barely even got romantic vibes from this dynamic. Like if they hadn't told me that this was going to be sapphic, I probably wouldn't have even thought that that's what was happening between these two characters. So I was kind of disappointed in that as well. Also, something that may be a little nitpicky, but is also one of my pet peeves, is that the author like slightly misused words throughout this book. Specifically in the first couple of chapters, there were a few words that I was like, that is not what that means, or like that's slightly different from how that word is actually meant to be used. I was like Googling these words to make sure that I was correct and that like maybe like she just knew another like form or use of this word, but no, they were being misused. And maybe it's nitpicky, maybe it won't bother other people, but like that is definitely a pet peeve of mine when it feels like the author used a thesaurus and doesn't actually know how to use these words in context, just tried to find kind of like fancy sounding or old-timey sounding synonyms without actually knowing how to use them in context, so they're like slightly wrong. Anyways, I gave this 3 stars, although now that I'm like complaining about it, I feel like maybe I should have given it like 2.5 stars or something, but it has 3 stars officially. Next, I read Sarah and the Royal Stars, which this is a graphic novel that I saw on a list when I had been looking up like fantasy lady knights. So that's how I ended up with this. But this did not really work for me. I don't know if I would have liked it better if I had been reading it in a more like serial manner where you get, you know, very small portions of the story at a time, as opposed to this, which I believe is like a few volumes put together. But in this, you know, we're following this, I think she's like a princess, and there's a war going on between her father, the king, and his brother, who is trying to take over their country. She's going on a quest, but there's a lot of like repetition and backtracking in the story because she keeps like leaving and coming back and then leaving and coming back, and then like it just keeps doing that, and it was just really frustrating and weird in like the pacing of the story. So was not a big fan of this one. After that, I still was trying to find more like fantasy lady knights. And so again, one that I had seen on a list of like recommendations for lady knights was Starless by Jacqueline Carey. I will say this should not have been on that list. The main character, not really a lady, also not a knight. So that doesn't really make sense. However, of the books that I read while I was on this like lady night kick, this is the one that I liked the best, which was a big surprise to me because I have DNF'd multiple books by Jacqueline Carey. I have this book because after reading Kushiel's Dart, I really like her writing, but I didn't really like the Kushiel world. And so I wanted to try something else from her, and I had bought a couple of books that were not in the Kushiel world from her. And so I was like, perfect, I'll read this, get this off my TBR. I've kind of been avoiding it because I have DNF'd multiple books from her before. But ended up really liking this one, and it was a big surprise. So in this is set in a world where the gods walk the earth. The gods have been exiled from heaven, and so they are literally walking the earth. They each have their own domain where there is a, you know, culture and religion that has sprung up around each of them based on their characteristics. And there is a prophecy that this one god named Miasmus, which does sound like miasma, but this god Miasmus is the god of chaos, and one day they will wake and destroy the world, and maybe heaven as well, I'm not sure. There is also a part of this prophecy that a specific group of people will be able to prevent this from happening. But this prophecy has been kind of lost and fragmented. So there are parts of it that we know, but there are still parts of like the details of that are missing from this prophecy. A part of this prophecy and this group of people who will be able to save the world is the Sunblessed and their shadow. So the Sunblessed is from this specific royal family that every so many generations someone is born on an eclipse, I think, which means they are the Sunblessed and they have special powers. Part of this also is that at the exact same moment, another child is born who is their counterpart. That is their shadow, and this child is kind of soul bonded to them and destined to be like their guardian or like their guard. And so the shadow is usually sent to be raised by these like warrior monks who live in the desert to learn how to become this great warrior so that they can be a guard. For the first time, the Sunblessed is actually a Sunblessed princess. It has always been a prince before this point, which also means the shadow was born a girl or assigned female at birth. However, because the shadow has to be trained by these warrior monks who live in the desert, they're like, we can't really just like send this one girl to go live among all of these men. So they declare the shadow, who is our main character, Kai, a Bazim, which is something within their culture, which essentially means that this is someone who was born a girl but is going to be raised and socialized as a boy and hold that like social cultural standing as a boy within their society. And apparently it's something that some families will do if they only have daughters and they need a child to kind of fill that social role of a son. Usually when this happens, the child knows this, and so then as they grow up, they're able to decide, do I want to continue living as a boy or do I want to live as a girl in this society? However, with our main character Kai, they don't tell him, and so he grows up in the desert with these monks, not knowing that he is Bazim. And that is one of the things that he discovers over time and how that changes his self-concept, and a lot of the story does revolve around Kai kind of trying to figure out his gender identity and gender expression. I would say where he kind of ends up is somewhere that I'd probably describe as gender fluid, primarily presenting masculine, but once in a while presenting feminine, but also primarily using he, him pronouns. And so we're following Kai through his life and through these like different stages, and that is a consistent like aspect or undercurrent throughout the rest of the story of Kai kind of figuring out his own identity and gender expression. The book is split into 3 distinct sections. The first section is following Kai in the desert as he is growing up and learning how to be a warrior monk. Then the second part, Kai goes to the city to live with the princess, and who is the sun-blessed princess. And so it's really about Kai getting to know this new environment, Kai and the princess getting to know each other, and then finding out more about this prophecy, because he has been pretty isolated in the desert up until this point, and so he's really like, this is his first exposure to the larger world. And then the final section is them on a quest. I loved the first section that was following Kai in the desert. That was my favorite part. It was like not a lot of like plot happened, but it was a lot of character, a lot of just like sitting in one place, getting to know these characters, watching Kai learn all of these new skills and learn more about himself, and is when he's first grappling, like discovering that he is Bazim and grappling with this new aspect of his identity. Second part of the book, also very good. I liked seeing him interact with the princess and seeing their dynamic develop. We got to see Kai confronting some of his like internalized, maybe like a little internalized misogyny, some of his own biases about what it means to be a girl or a woman, and how like when he discovered that he is Bazim, he so completely rejected that because he was like, well, only men can be strong and I am a warrior and I need to be strong. And so kind of having more exposure to the world, maybe this may be some of his first exposure to interacting with women at all, since he's been living with these monks in the desert, and kind of confronting some of his own biases and figuring out what that means for his own identity. So that was all very interesting, and also getting to like get to know a little bit more about like the politics and the machinations of this world, and this prophecy. So second part, also good. Third part, was not really a fan, because it just changes so drastically, like pacing, tone. I feel like some of the characters got flattened out because it just suddenly was moving so fast. It felt like that last section should have been maybe its own book. Like this is, you know, 3 distinct parts, and while I appreciate that, you know, I could get this whole story in one volume, this is a standalone, to some extent, I feel like it should have been broken up more. I think that it could either have been split into 2 books. There is a point in the second part that I think could have been kind of like a cliffhanger stopping point, and then we could have like picked up in the next book. Or because it's already divided into 3 sections, it would have been very easy to make this a trilogy. And then that third part could have gotten more time to draw out the plot and make the pacing make more sense, and still include some of that character development. I think the plot itself, along with feeling just like very rushed, very fast, it in a lot of ways it felt overly convenient in its use of the prophecy. Sometimes, you know, prophecies, I feel like you have to be careful. If it's done well, it can feel like, wow, that's like so clever how like, you know, the prophecy came to fruition. If it's not done well, if it's not given enough time, it just feels overly convenient as to how like the prophecy says this and then we do that and it just like all works out. They also in this section like introduced a lot of new characters who did not get the time to really like develop and for me to feel connected to them. And so there were some characters who were introduced and then died within just this last third of the book, and so I really didn't care enough about them to feel upset. And I can tell that like you were supposed to be upset that they died, but my main reaction was like, oh good, I'm glad they sacrificed themselves so it wasn't the main character. So I don't know, I just like the third part really wasn't great, but I enjoyed 2/3 of the book a lot. And for me, I generally am not the kind of person that like the ending of the book will make or break it for me. As long as it is not like retroactively ruining things. Like there are some books where the ending, you know, does something that kind of retroactively like undoes all of the things before it. That's not this situation. If a book like just ends kind of with a fizzle instead of a bang, that doesn't ruin the book for me as long as I enjoyed most of the book, which is kind of my situation here. It sort of fizzled out at the end, but a lot of this I really liked. So I had a good time with it. I gave this 4 stars. So that was all of my July reading. Then in August, I read All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is the first in the Murderbot series, which is a sci-fi series following Murderbot, who is a bot that is meant to be kind of like a security guard, I guess, but it's hacked its own system and now it has a lot more freedom, but is trying to stay under the radar so that nobody knows that it's done this. And really, it just wants to stay home, be left alone, watch its TV shows. Like, just leave me alone. But it gets kind of wrapped up in a conspiracy. There is a research team that it is meant to protect, and something fishy is going on. So I read this as part of my sci-fi vlog, so I will talk more about it there. I, in general, felt pretty neutral towards this one. So when that sci-fi vlog comes out, you'll get to hear more. I also, as part of that vlog, read Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. I've been meaning to read this for a really long time, but just never really got around to it. And then they came out with these 10th anniversary edition covers, and I was like, that's just weird in a way that I really like and I need to read it. But I have been meaning to read it because it is sci-fi that has a lot to do with like the environment. And I don't know, whenever I look up like nature SFF, this comes up. In this, we're following also a research team who are going into Area X, which is this like mysterious area where research teams have, you know, either gone missing, come back changed, killed themselves, killed each other, like weird stuff has happened. And we're following a biologist who is going into Area X and seeing the weird stuff that she encounters. It's very weird, very mysterious. And yeah, I'm gonna, again, talk more about it in that sci-fi vlog when it comes out, because I go much more in depth. This one had some ups and downs for me. I really enjoyed the first part, then it kind of like decreased a little bit for the second part of it. So there are elements to it that I think were really working for me and some elements that were not working as well, but I gave this one 3.5 stars. Then I also I read these across 2 different months, but I'm just gonna put them together. I reread Black Sun and Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse, which are her fantasy series inspired by, I think, pre-Columbian Americas. And in this, you know, we're following like a crow god, a sun priest, a siren, and all of their storylines are converging in this first book, and then it kind of expands and becomes more political in the second and third books. I am currently finishing up the third book, so I'm going to talk more in detail about it when I get to reviewing the third and final book in the trilogy, so I can just kind of talk about them all at once. But I really liked rereading these. I'm glad that I did. The first time I read these, I loved Black Sun, and then I was not as into Fevered Star, and I think a lot of that was just because I had kind of lost track of a lot of elements of the world and the characters, and so it just didn't like hit me the right way as I was reading it. But rereading these back to back, I actually remembered all of the context, when I was reading Fevered Star, and I enjoyed it a lot more. So I gave Black Sun 5 stars, and I think I gave Fevered Star 4 stars. Then in September, I reread Son of the Shadows by Juliet Marillier, the second book in the Seven Waters series. I am planning to have a vlog and a review for this as well, hopefully. We will see if I can get myself together to post those. Overall, once again, really enjoyed my reread of this. I think it's interesting that from book 1 to book 2, I can see an improvement in her writing and pacing in the story, because Daughter of the Forest, I think, is Juliet Marillier's debut novel. It was a great debut, but as I said, there were a few pacing issues, and I think you can definitely see like a step up from the first book to the second book. This one I feel like has a lot more relationship drama and angst in it. For a long time, this was my favorite book in the series, and I'm not sure if that's gonna remain true or not. My favorite books in the series have kind of changed upon each reread. So as I continue to reread through this series, we'll see which one ends up on top this time around. But in this one, we are following the next generation of Seven Waters, following Leodin, who is the daughter of Sarka, our main character in the first book. And yeah, it was really fun to reread this. I've been enjoying these rereads. Gave this one 5 stars as well. Then I read Penric and the Bandit by Lois McMaster Bujold. This is the 13th book, maybe, in the Penric and Desdemona series set in her world of the 5 gods. I just love this series. It's so delightful, and this was actually a really fun one. Of course, I've enjoyed, I think, all of the books in this series, but of course there are some that are like more fun than others. I really liked this one because in this we are following Penric as he is kind of on a mission, you know? He's seeking out I think some like ancient texts, and along the way he encounters a bandit who thinks he is an easy mark because Penric, you know, he is traveling alone. He's obviously very like bookish. He's very unassuming as a character. Just he doesn't seem like somebody who is like powerful or be able to take care of himself. And so this bandit kind of attaches himself to Penric and is hoping for him to be an easy mark. But of course we know that Penric is actually incredibly powerful because he has the power of this demon within him. But he also serves the white god, which is the bastard, who is the god of thieves. And so he is kind of conflicted where he's like, well, you know, I don't want him to rob me, but I also kind of feel bad that like I know he's gonna be unsuccessful, so he's kind of wasting his time and I feel bad about that. But also like he's technically the domain of my god, and so maybe I'm supposed to like help him. And so we're just like following them as like this bandit is being like, he's an easy mark, I'm gonna take advantage of him, and Penric is just like, I'm sorry buddy, I'm gonna try and help you. And it's just delightful. It was so much fun. And I think I gave this one 4 stars. After that, I read Ammonite by Nicola Griffith. This is also part of my sci-fi vlog, so you'll be seeing more details about this as well. But in this one, we are following an anthropologist who is being sent to a planet to test a new vaccine against this virus that has killed like a lot of people. So on this planet, there is a virus that kills all men that encounter it, and about 20% of women who become infected with it. However, there are people who live on this planet, who are native to this planet, and it is a society of all women who have been living for generations. So her official purpose for going to this planet is to test this new vaccine to see if it works, so then they would be able to like send new people to colonize this planet. But her unofficial mission is, as an anthropologist, she wants to learn more about these people, how they continue to like live and have children if they are only women who live on this planet. And also she's just interested in their culture and their lore, and she's trying to figure out like their origins, like how did humans, because these are essentially humans, but they are on this separate planet, so like how did they end up here? Anyways, so that is her unofficial mission, which means that she just kind of like strikes out into the wilderness, and that causes a lot of problems. So again, you'll hear more about this in my sci-fi vlog if you want to know, but I enjoyed this one more than some of the other sci-fi I've been reading, and I think I gave this one 4 stars. And then finally, the last book that I read in September was The Brilliant Death by Amy Rose Capetta. This is YA fantasy. This is set in a world that is inspired by, I can't remember if it's medieval or Renaissance Italy. I think it's Renaissance. I'm not totally sure. But it's, you know, loose inspiration. And in this, we're following 2 characters who have magic, which both involve shape-shifting. Our main character, Tio, she is the daughter of one of the like powerful families, and she has the ability to change objects or people or anything into other things. And so unbeknownst to her family, she's kind of become like the family hitman. So magic in this world, different countries seem to have different opinions of magic, but where she is, magic is not very accepted. And so her family doesn't even know that she has magical abilities. She keeps it secret, but she uses these magical abilities to take out anybody who poses any threat to her family by turning them into objects. She will turn like people into like a music box, a mirror, a comb, and then she keeps them in her bedroom at home. The other character in this, who is a shapeshifter, is someone that she encounters named Silo, who is able to change themselves. They can change both into like different human forms, different genders, but also can like turn into a bird or like a gust of wind. So they can really just like change into anything. However, their ability to shapeshift, especially between genders, is reflective of their gender identity. They are, I guess, gender fluid and change, not even just day to day, but sometimes like moment to moment, between being just the masculine or feminine versions of themselves. Tio, while she has brothers, neither of them are really fit to inherit like the family business. And she actually has like the interest, ability, personality to take that on, but can't because she's a girl. And so some things happen that mean that she has to strike out to go to the capital to represent her family. And because her father is incapacitated at the time and her brothers are unfit and have their own issues going on, she takes on the persona of a son of her family, and then while she is there learns about a whole lot of other stuff that is going on, both like politically, and there's like warmongering happening, but also things having to do with finding and controlling and or killing people with magic. So she gets involved in that. I enjoyed this. I had fun reading it. I liked that, you know, it felt very light in comparison to some of the other things that I have been reading. Not that it doesn't have some like heavier topics in it, but overall the tone of it felt more light. I definitely liked the first half more than the second half. The first half had almost like a fairy tale feel to it, so it was kind of like fairy tale mafia vibes, which is an interesting combination, not what I was expecting. So yeah, I liked the first half. The second half, I felt like it had a very different tone. It was much more focused on like the plot and politics of it, which was okay, but just like wasn't as fun. And also, I think there were some points where the character made some uncharacteristic decisions that were like overly trusting, when she is a character who is meant to be very like suspicious, very like ruthless and cutthroat in some instances, which I really liked about her. I enjoyed so much about her that she's just like, you seem vaguely threatening to my family. I'm gonna just like turn you into a little music box and then put you on a shelf in my bedroom so I can look at you. Like, that was great. I loved that about her. But she also is supposed to have this really like strategic mind. And then there are points where like she just makes decisions or trusts people in a way that felt very out of character for her. Because like, based on the first half, I was on board for all of those characteristics. I was like, yes, I see these happening. I'm on board for this. And then the second half is like, they kind of went away. I did really like her relationship with CeeLo and the two of them together. So their whole dynamic, like that character was interesting, their dynamic was fun. I do feel like some of the emotional scenes were maybe a little overwrought in the way that they were written, so like a little dramatic. And then sometimes revelations were like over-explained. But you know, overall I had fun with this. I gave it 3.5 stars. If it had stayed consistent with like the first half of the book, which I was really liking, it probably would have been more like a 4-star, but since it kind of like went down a little bit in the second half, it's 3.5. All right, so those are all of the books that I read in July, August, and September. That is a lot more books than I realized, and I've been talking for a very long time and I am out of breath. This is the problem, well, this is one of multiple problems with doing these quarterly wrap-ups. One is I don't always remember stuff from the first month, and the other is that if I actually do read a lot of books, this becomes exhausting. Anyways, how was your third quarter? How was your reading in July, August, September? Did you read anything that you really loved? I would love to know. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.